You can say,
Hi there, I'm Danny Henderson. Welcome back to my Feel Sometimes Very Disturbing Disclosure channel. Today, I have a new beautiful friend to introduce to you. Before I do, I want to tell you that he is a connected relative to our beautiful Rachel Vaughan. A lot of you that come to this channel know that I deal with the hardest subjects imaginable on this planet. And we bring them and we air them. And we bring the children that are now adults into this channel for them to share their experiences so that those of you healing from such awful atrocities, no matter what level, because if something happened to you, it doesn't mean that someone has had worse and you shouldn't feel bad about yourself. This is a time of healing. So I'm going to give you a very graphic warning. A graphic warning. We're going to discover and discuss some very, very unsettling subjects, but it's going to be okay. Let me introduce you to Doug McIntyre. Welcome, Doug.
hey, Danny, nice to meet you. Nice to be here. Hello to everyone watching.
Thank you so much. And it's lovely that I met you through beautiful Rachel Vaughan in Australia. And she's a great friend of mine in the channel and has brought obviously some very historical events that have happened that Australian police, Australian government, Freemasonry societies in Australia have shut down on purpose. You children have been awful targets. You are born into a bloodline environment. But rather than me tell your story in a synopsis, may I hand to you and may you just tell me what you remember the first time you have memory as a little boy. Where did you grow up and what was life like?
Thanks, Danny. Well, I was born in Sydney, Australia, um, in the early 1960s. I was the second of four children. I was born to parents. My father was a serial killer, and involved in all sorts of things, rapes, pedophilia, the works, but has always been protected. So he died last year. I saw him on his deathbed and he hadn't changed at all. Um, and so my family lived in a place called Cogra, which is a southern suburb of Sydney. It's about 15 minutes south of the city. At that time, Cogra was very much the hospital I was born in Cogra is the same hospital Kathy O'Brien was born in later that decade.
Right.
And that was St George Hospital in Cogra. They were connected to Sydney University, which at that time was connected to the CIA and MK Ultra. So Martin Orne from the CIA came to Sydney University, and when you listen to Rachel, to Kathy, and to a lot of other survivors here, a lot of their perpetrators came from the psychology department of Sydney University. Now, Cogra was a hotbed for hypnotism, or what used to be called mesmerism. And so there, as we understand, there's a collision between psychology and the occult and the CIA. And so where I grew up, my family's links to or involvement in the occult, there was a huge amount of incest in my family. One of the things I wanted to find out on my father's deathbed was whether he was actually my father or not, and it's quite likely his father was my father. So in my family, you know, um, my father thought that everyone was fair game, including his own children, own babies, everything like that. Um, so he would go down the pub bragging about what he would get up to, including he and my mother's mother had an affair for 4 years. So that sort of gives you a bit of an idea as to what it was like. And so I was sexually abused and physically abused from as early as I can remember. And I'd always remembered the violent abuse, which was off the charts. My parents were incredibly violent towards me. I was the scapegoat of the family because I was the one that was so angry. I'd always speak up because I couldn't take it anymore. And so by the age of 10, I'd been trafficked, I'd been repeatedly raped, I'd been part of experiments on MK Ultra. And so from the age of 10, when I could then give testimony in court, my parents repeatedly tried to kill me. So they would take me to the beach when the beaches were closed and no swimming was allowed. And my father would take me out in the surf. I couldn't swim, I could only dog paddle, and they'd let me go into the rip. And that day it was just that a young guy walking along the beach, a surfer, saw me and came out and rescued me. And both he and I almost drowned. And my parents were not very happy about that at all. So by the time I was in my mid 30s, I'd had about 50 brushes with death. And I'd died and come back and things like that. So it's pretty tumultuous sort of childhood. I'd carried the trauma in my body. My sexual abuse was so severe that when, as a young boy, I went through adolescence, I basically had selective autism for about 9 months. I couldn't speak because I found puberty so confronting that, I felt like I was turning into one of my abusers. So I've had a whole, recently, I've had to write a impact statement as to how this all affected me because I'm starting to go through the courts over some of these things against some of the institutions that I was abused through. And it's even to this day I still have episodes if I'm triggered where I just shake uncontrollably. So it's getting better and better, but it's hard work. It's at times brutal because I'm having to go back and recover the memories that were too painful to remember, and there were also memories where they tried to stop me remembering through electrocution. And I've got a number of friends now in Australia and in Sydney who've been through what I've been through, and that's really, for me, really comforting and validating. But yeah, it's a crazy history. I basically don't have a family anymore. I've been totally ostracized for speaking out. But for me, the important thing is I know my truth. I know what I've gone through. And with these beautiful friends I have now who validate me and back me up. And, when we share what we've gone through, there is so much commonality. I wished I hadn't gone through what I had, but I have. And, um, and the days when I think, oh, maybe I'm making it up, I just sit there and start going through a checklist and I could get into hundreds of things as to why, so I know I can't deny to myself what I've gone through. So that's sort of in a little bit of a nutshell. But yeah, it was the ritual abuse was the sacrifice of children. I was forced to be involved in that as a little child. And with the CIA MK Ultra, a lot of what they used me for experiments on was color TV programming and how to make color TV um, as hypnotizable to the masses as possible. So I was one of the children in the early experiments in Sydney, and for years I would have the images that they would imprint on my brain, and I'd lie in bed at night and they would just go over and over and over in my head. It was like I couldn't get them out of my head. I'd been forced to watch these things so much. Um, so, the people that run the world are really despotic. They've got a plan, they're advancing it. You know, we all believe they're not going to succeed. I don't think evil ever succeeds because it's destructive. But for me, I know because of my own life experience, I see the outcome of some of the things that they would do to me as a child reflected in social media, in TV, and things like that today.
Wow, that is an incredible um, description of a life lived thus far. And thank you so much for sharing it. I mean, obviously, you're very connected with your own experiences, and that really does show in the way you can just deliver, chapters and decades of events that have occurred. People that have watched many survivor stories, experiences, MK Ultra, MyLab, secret space programs. I mean, these children are taken from a very young age and used in many different scenarios, military, government, etc., classroom.
Yeah.
Experimentation. My friend Tony Rodriguez was used in a similar way with other children in California. They put a helmet on with electrodes, would strap them into a chair that hung from the ceiling. So they couldn't see the other children, but he knew they were there because they slept in little cots inside what we call a mobile home on an airport base in California. And they would show images of Disney and flash it with Psycho stabbing the Bates Motel. And they would be electrocuting the children at the same time. And their, premise for doing this was to advance the spirit of human consciousness, to see how far they could push a child, how far they could bring a child to near-death experience or actually death experience. And to them, that was in the name of science, which is obviously complete and utter bollocks. They're trying to, cap the creation spark on so many levels. And so, again, I thank you for sharing that history with us. One of the first things you said, and I almost stopped you. I'm glad I didn't. But you said, my dad's a serial killer. I'm like, holy bananas.
I saw you respond to that. Yeah, there's quite a backstory to that. So,
Glory,
I've
glory.
evidence of probably around 9 to 12 murders that I know he's done. I've gone to the police. The police have come after me instead of him. I when when you go through traumatic events like this, you often either block a lot of them out in order to survive and get through daily life, even though the body remembers, that the mind blocks it out. And then you progressively remember, and talking to other survivors, we have a similar pattern. It's not the same. Some people remember everything at once. I had always had memories of the brutal bashings and whippings and things like that that I copped at home. It was like basically, like military training, growing up. I was never hugged, I was never touched. So I got total utter neglect. And at the same time, it was absolutely brutal. I wasn't allowed to speak unless spoken to. If I asked a question, then I would be bashed, you know, terribly. My mother used to be very jealous of my father. He would know how to bash me without leaving a mark. Whereas, I remember going to school one day and I was so covered in welts and bruises from head to foot that all the kids made fun of me. I was that beaten up. Um, but back then there were no social services, so no one got involved. People in the street would have heard the screams coming from our house, but nothing happened. But getting back to Dad as a serial killer, he started killing, from what I understand, quite young. Um, the first one that I know about was he went to a dance and King hit a guy from behind and killed the guy, and then jumped over the fence and left, and his friends covered for him. So he never got charged. He was part of a gang that would go up to the local dance and offer girls rides home and then rape them on the way. So he was part of this gang, which I've reported to the Australian Royal Commission, to the police. Nothing ever happened. They would also go into Sydney and do what was called poofter bashing. So they would go and get gay men and bash them. One of the men, he drowned in a fountain in Hyde Park and stole his watch and then came home and asked mum to cover for him. Another time with an auntie, he went and stayed at her place. She was found strangled under the bed the next morning by her children, and her boyfriend was charged with the crime, not my father. So I've got a whole, and this is part of what I'm going to re-put up on the internet, a whole list of murders my father was involved in, or attempted murders and things like that, and the police just wouldn't touch him. They acknowledged that he was the most violent man that they'd ever met. And when I would confront him as a kid, I remember one day, because he would treat us like slaves. He wanted to sit in it was Sunday and he would come and go as he pleased. He'd disappear and then come back, and then cause mayhem. And he was a violent alcoholic and a drug taker. So one Sunday morning, it was a beautiful Sunday, and he wanted to sit out in the backyard on the lounge and drink his beer and read the paper. So the whole family was marshaled to carry the furniture out in the backyard and everything like that, get it all set up. So he, had his perfect, you know, Sunday afternoon or Sunday morning it was, and something happened, and I was just boiling because I just despised him because of what he used to do to me, and I turned around and told him to F off. So when I would confront him, and I only did it 2 or 3 times, but I would just get the point I couldn't take it anymore. He just picked up a brick and threw it straight at my face as hard as he could. I ducked just in time, and I was only a little kid. I might have been 9 or 10 or something like that. And he ran after me. I went straight under the house, which was about 4 foot, about less than a meter. And he realized because I was little, if he came under one way, I went the other way. So then he went and got the hose to try and hose me out. And then that didn't work because I sat right up the back in the dirt and the cobwebs and spiders and just sat there sobbing. Anyway, he went back to his beer and that, and then I sort of had to creep out the other side of the house and disappear and make myself scarce. So that was sort of a snapshot of what home life was like. Other times it'd bash my mother to a pulp. She'd be covered in blood. I'd have to go to the neighbours begging and pleading for them to let me use their phone because often, well, we didn't have a phone. Often we didn't have electricity. We didn't have a car. None of the neighbours wanted to get involved. So I just went from neighbour to neighbour to neighbour begging them. Finally, one of the neighbours at the end of the street let me use their phone. I called the police. They turned up. Dad told them that mum was a prostitute and that he'd found her selling herself, and so they laughed and said, well, she deserved it, and left. I ended up trying to sleep under the house that night. It was in the middle of winter, sub-zero. I was too scared to go inside because of the punishment I might catch. Um, and I got to the point where I started getting hypothermia. So I knew I had to go in. I was starting to get quite nauseous from the cold. So I thought if I stay here, I'm going to die. So I went inside and mum was sitting in there reading a book. So she didn't come out looking for me either. And, my childhood was like that. My parents were, basically always trying to kill me. So it was, I just had to make myself scarce. They got divorced when I was in my teenage years. But, even it was my mother died just over a month ago, and about 3 years ago, I had to cut her and my siblings off for the third and final time because of what they were doing to me. She was coming into my house when I wasn't here and poisoning the food, and again would go to the police. This is the last few years, so it's been a lifelong thing. Um, and so I had to go to the police, had to change locks, and do things. So my housemate and I were getting sick. And then about, I don't know, 2 months ago, my mother started ramping it up again, trying to befriend all my friends because she's done that before, and then, try to say things about me that destroys my friendships. And so she started again going to neighbours, things like that. She had a stroke and couldn't talk. So it was basically the universe saying, enough's enough. My siblings wouldn't let me see her in hospital before she died. And so she died. No one told me. I didn't get invited to the funeral. Um, and yeah, so that's my family. I mean, it's, you know,
Yeah.
it-
It's just so horrendous, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for that little boy that was you, that was so brutally, horrifically neglected on so many levels. And one of the reasons why you're here on my channel is A, to share in the hope that we can touch the lives and hearts of other men, males,
yeah,
who are healing something such as this. And again, we have to really emphasize the point that as you are giving us such a catastrophic assortment of things that happen to you, other men or young boys now, whatever stage of age they are, anything that happened to them that left an imprint is important. We have this kind of way of like, oh, well, I didn't suffer as bad as Doug McIntyre, therefore I must not be as valuable, which of course is a lie. We are all very,
yeah.
very valuable. So if we could just take a moment to address directly your wishes in what you have survived and still recovering from on different levels potentially. What could we say to the men out there who have been abused in similar ways?
I think to believe in yourself and to remember who you are. What got me through all this was I have a very strong spiritual, psychic side. And I've always, even though I was totally neglected, and the neglect was by design, I was totally neglected and untouched. So when I was sexually abused, there was a hope that I would want it. Um, if I be a little bit graphic, so I've spoken to a lot of men who've gone through male sexual assault. My father would think because he could stimulate my body to arousal as a 3-year-old, he would then try and convince me that I wanted it. He wanted me to be a pedophile. And I absolutely despised it and absolutely hated it. And for a lot of men who've gone through sexual abuse, we choose different paths of healing. For some men, they become utterly repulsed by other men. Um, some men, it affects their sexuality. There can be a whole range, and there's no right way. But I think at the end of the day, it's learning to love yourself and to know that you were not to blame. part of the cults and the intelligence agencies is to do things to children where they try to convince the child that they wanted it. When I was involved in the sacrifices of other children, my hand was forcibly held on a knife while the other child was killed, and then I was told that I was to blame. One time, my brother disobeyed, older brother, and it's I was buried alive and he was blamed for it. So it's this constant shame, guilt, trying to do the things where they warp your mind as a little child, um, and to try to get you to believe that things that aren't true. And I think, men and women, for all of us, we've got to come back to who we are. I believe we are love returning to love. We come from a soul state, which is pure love. We come to this planet of courage to learn courage and to be strong. And then we return to that, with these incredible etheric, energetic beings that get crammed into these incredibly beautiful human bodies, but they're so, you know, um, you know, constricting. That's what I'm thinking of. And, after we die, the first thing we feel is relief. A lot of our dramas drop away and things like that because we're no longer constricted. We're back into our soul state. And so the thing that has held me all these years is to remember that I am a soul, and from a soul and back to a soul, I'll return. And for all of us, there are guides, there are spirits, there are our higher selves that we can call on to help us. And I've had some, incredibly difficult times. I'm telling you the tip of the iceberg. I've had, periods where I've been suicidal and, my guides have stopped me and things like that, where things have become too much. I've died, I've come back. There are so many times I've come to the edge of death, but never got over the cliff. Um, but in all of it, it's, when I look back and, as I get older and try and make sense of it and understand it and, you know, create a life where, I have joy getting up every morning instead of, horror or fear. It's remembering that love. It's to remember that we are loved, and that's the truth. We are so totally loved, and the lie is that we're not. And so that's what holds me. That's what strengthens me. I mean, I've scraped myself up off the road so many times. It's not funny. And I just say to myself, just get up one more time, then you fall down. Now life is a lot better. I've done a lot of modalities of healing and things like that. So I say to people, don't give up, keep going, believe in yourself, respond to yourself with love and understanding. I remember in my 20s, I used to scream, "What's wrong with me? What's wrong with me?" because I'd blocked out so much. And then in my mid 20s, the sexual abuse memories started coming back of the incest. When my daughter was born in my 30s, then all the ritual abuse stuff, memories started coming back. With my parents dying, then I feel safe to remember more and more things. At the moment, I'm dealing with a lot of the trapped trauma and memories from the MK Ultra, which is just horrific. Being raped by rods, and then my father being suffocated till I was dead and then resuscitated. I would fight like crazy and then they would drug me so I couldn't fight anymore. So it was this whole thing to break my will, to force me into compliance. Um, and where my body was never safe. So it's just, even in the midst of all that, even through everything that I've gone through, the love is still there. And it's, we've got to keep holding on to it. And even when we don't feel it's still there, I feel, I've have quite a magical life, which people might wonder why, but it's like, despite everything I've gone through, I love who I am. I care for who I am. I really enjoy, loving and caring for others. It's something I really, really get a lot out of. And it's the simple things in life. It's sitting in the sun and looking at the stars and great conversations with friends and things like that. So it's coming back to the important things. It's coming back to, so, dealing with your own stuff, because then as you do, it changes everything around you and who you interact with. And for men, it's so important. Like, I remember when I got divorced, I thought, because of all my trauma, I could either hate men or learn, in a sense, to love men, in the sense of, um, learning how to relate to them on a healing, like in a good way, because in my family I didn't have any really good positive male role models. My father was an absolute monster, and so he had the neglect, and then there was the horrific abuse. Um, and so I had every reason to become very, spiteful and hateful, of life and things like that. And I've got people in my family who've become like that. Or I could say, well, I've got to face my pain and I've got to move through it. And sometimes the only way that we can heal is to face things and to move through them. And people say to me, why don't you leave the past in the past? And I just said to them, well, you can't leave it in the past unless you deal with it, unless you sit there and come to terms with it. So, I'm on the journey of sitting there, having to remember, having to feel what it felt like to go through this so that I can reclaim my body, I can feel safe in my body again. And it's brutal, but the long-term effects are just amazing. So for men, particularly when they're being sexually abused, it's important to reclaim your body. I mean, I think women are a lot more adept at this because women are more supportive of each other, whereas men, as you say, we're often taught we're not allowed to show emotions or feelings or things like that. But what I'm feeling is I'm meeting more and more men who've gone through the abuse, and we talk and share about what we've gone through, then healing comes.
Oh my goodness. I mean, the layers there, there's so many layers that you
Yeah,
delivered and layers and ways of healing. And again, we want to speak directly to the men in particular in this broadcast because I've had so many women, in the same realm, satanic ritual abuse survivors, Masonic, incest, just bad parents, bad family members, violating children's bodies in such a way that some never recover. And as a therapist, I had one giant of a man come a few years ago to me. He was finally ready to deal with his abuse. And it was from a school teacher that started, it was a female school teacher, Beth Marinello in California. And she was touching this little boy from age 8. And the
yeah,
first, second, or third time he sat with me and told me that she'd been doing things to him, he would stop at a point and break down, and his body was just uncontrollably shaking because he couldn't understand how a female teacher that he was supposed to be safe with would be
yeah,
touching his penis and he had no sperm. And
yeah,
it was something that just couldn't. And he was a parent himself, two girls and a boy, and it was just too triggering, for him. Unfortunately, he died. He didn't ever recover from his
no, yeah,
heart, but because he had such dreadful um, uh, foundational relationship with this monstrous pedophile woman, he then went on to select dreadful women, monstrous, cruel, cold, cruel women, the stories
yeah,
that he shared with me. And I think that's also important to, as we're talking to the men, and whether the men are gay or straight, it's not, but again, those
no.
that went, so that's important to cover too. But there's so much to cover. We want to be as careful and as loving and also, respect your experiences because you are also still healing. And yeah, so what would you like to say to that?
Yeah, well, I was in a group last year of men who'd been sexually abused. We're having organisations here in Australia form for supportive men, and that was very eye-opening. And all the men in the group all had complex PTSD from being sexually abused, whether it was from a woman or man or whatever. But it affects you, like it affects women because our boundaries are violated. We're meant to be sacred. We're meant to be protected. Um, and so it has a profound impact on you. It has a profound impact on your identity, on your sexuality, on everything. For me, I don't know if I'll ever know what my sexuality is because of the trauma I've gone through. And it's like I tend to be more what I'd probably call pansexual. I'm attracted to the person, but I have so much trauma and abuse to go through. There are times that I'm non-sexual at all. And so I see that sexuality is something that can be quite fluid in terms of someone's healing and things like that. I know men who've been very happily married to women. one friend and his wife got pregnant and she was going to give birth to twins and she aborted the twins without telling him. And that hurt him so much he became gay. And I know gay men who've been hurt so much by other men, they've become straight. So the whole sexuality, I think, is a lot more fluid than the narrative that we're told online. And men go through different experiences at different times. I had wonderful times with my ex-wife, but then I've also had wonderful times, healing times with men. And I know that, part of because my trauma has been so severe, it's important for me to have, had relationships with people of both sexes in order to heal. Because, and in terms of those relationships in the beginning, like your friend, I would choose people who were like my parents, not as bad as my parents, but, I would be the rescuer. I would, always be trying to help people. I would have no boundaries. I would put everyone before myself. But the process of healing and the process of dealing with my own pain, my own trauma, but also embracing my own love means that the people that are around me keep improving and improving. And, there used to be a time where I remember, as a teenager, if someone asked me to do something, not something bad, but, I'd be running around helping everyone and everything. I couldn't say no. Where because of my healing now, if I don't want to do something, I just say no. I don't feel guilty about it. I don't have to give a reason. And so I can see the progression in my own life, and I've done a lot of modalities. You said you're a therapist. I started off with psychoanalysis. Then I went into healing for dissociative identity disorder because I was very fractured through the level of trauma, and they purposely did that to me. I've done a huge amount of psychedelics, which has been quite incredible. And all these different modalities. I've got into tantra. I've, looked at sexological body work, all these different things because they're all investments in myself. They're investments to say, I'm valuable, I'm worthwhile, my healing's worthwhile. I deserve to have good relationships with other people. I don't need to let the past define who I am. And so what I'd say, well, to everyone, men and women, is do what works for you. Go out and try things, try this modality, try that modality, but believe that you're worth it. Believe that you deserve better. Believe that you need to heal. Like for me, the shaking that I would get, it would be uncontrollable. Sometimes friends would, go to call ambulances. It was so bad. And I'd be like, it's fine, I'll be okay. But I've had to go to the memories underneath that, which were brutal, and they were the memories where they used to suffocate me and then resuscitate me over and over again. Because, as you say, they're in the cults and the intelligence community, they're fascinated with the human condition because if they can understand how our biology, how psychology, how all of that works, it gives them more power. And the reason they need power, the reason why they're so desperate for power is because they feel so vulnerable for all the evil they've done. So that's the psychology of what happens there. Both my parents are total narcissists, and the whole narcissism thing is something like, and this is where my guides have been very strong with me. They say don't even allow little bad things to happen because it's a slippery slope. My father started harming people, quite at a young age, and both my parents um, I don't think they were that wealthy, but they were spoiled. They weren't taught boundaries. And then as they came into adulthood, they kept on, pushing boundaries without accountability. And my mother, for a short period, was a probation and parole officer. And I said to her, why do people reoffend all the time? And she was actually it was quite illuminating what she said. She said, because she would have to write pre-sentence reports on people who'd gone up before the judge. And she said, the reason why they keep reoffending is because they're trying to be made accountable for their crimes and they go worse and worse and worse. And often their families, their parents will keep protecting them and stopping them being made accountable. And I thought that's a really interesting perception because on a soul level, we're wanting to be accountable, we're wanting to learn, we come here to learn. And yet, if we don't learn, we just do worse and worse things. And so I don't think it's the whole picture, but I think it's part of the jigsaw.
Yeah, massively. I want to ask you a little bit about, again, going back to basics in your household growing up. People are
Yeah.
going to be thinking that if they've never had an experience like yours or a childhood like yours, they're going to be
Yeah.
thinking, why? Why would parents beat their kids so? Why would the dad be so bad? And, obviously beating up the mum and like, what were their backgrounds like? Are they from a bloodline family? Like, what is the point of all this horrific terror, let's say on you and your siblings? So where did
Well, there's a number of things. One is the narcissism, the total self-gratification. My father, would have sex with anyone and everything, basically, and he thought he was clever at it. So for him, it's like people who are obscenely wealthy, these, I call them the obsoletes who try and run the world. They got billions of dollars, yet they still have to have more. It's this emptiness that they have to keep trying to fill. But there's also the bloodline. So Rachel's got the Kennedy bloodline. I haven't, so I've probably got part of it through that. My family is the McIntyre family, and McIntyre means son of a Mason. I think my father believed it's not so much whether sometimes whether we have the bloodline, it's that they believe they have the bloodline. So if they believe they have the bloodline, it's the justification to say, well, we're part God, therefore everyone else is below us, and we can do whatever we want. And you see that narrative played out in elements of Christianity, in elements of Islam, in elements of Judaism. It's always this creating two classes of people. So through the McIntyre bloodline, I think my father believed we went back to the Tuatha De Danann and the Fomorians, which are the gods of the Irish, Scottish clans and things like that. On my father's mother's side, they were Portuguese and Dutch, and so they went back to, she was Franca, which was a Moravian bloodline. And then on my mother's side, we're connected to the royal family in Norway, so they were the Harkins. So there's a number of different bloodlines in the family that are royal and things like that. I remember my father being insistent that he had to rape me at the age of 3 as part of a cult ceremony, and it was part of something I had to go through in my family. Um, and that was horrific, but it was, you know, I remember the look on his face. I had to undergo that, and I had to go through that. For me as a child, it was like I wasn't given choices. I was forced to do things.
Was that the first memory you have of physical sexual trauma on your body? And can you explain to us why is the anus on a little boy such a target?
Well, I think it's the orifices, and it's not so much the anus, it's more the breaking of the will. So what they want, because I mean, as a child, I had so much anger. I just wanted to kill my parents as a child. But, my guide said to me, well, if you do that, you're going to become just like them. And do you want to be like them? And that was to be like them was the worst thing in the world to me. And it's more the violation. It's like also when they would suffocate me and resuscitate me and things like that. It's to totally break the will until there is no will left and you're a compliant slave. So that is more of it. I mean, I always think of, um, I say to people that the deceivers are the most deceived of all. And so when I look at my father and the people my father associated with and my mother and that, they had these belief systems where they thought they were powerful, but they were the complete opposite. It's like, people who store up everything. I mean, we're all going to die someday and you can't take it with you. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like, the things that are eternal are our memories, are our experiences, not our possessions. And so it's important we store up the eternal things, the doing good to others, the helping others, the loving ourselves. They're the things that last for eternity. They're the things they take with us when we die. Whereas, everything around us, it's nice to be comfortable. I'm quite comfortable now as an adult. Whereas as a child, I had nothing, we lived in abject poverty. My father didn't, he spent all his money on himself, but the whole thing with the anus, I've heard a lot of things about it. But for me, it was more, it's the humiliation, it's the shame, but it's the breaking of the will. I would kick and scream, and then they would drug me, and I just couldn't fight. And then the drugs would wear off, and they'd still be going. And it was just to make me that compliant slave. And it's what they do to us today on a mass level with mass media, and it's a trauma-based mind control. So I think the average person now has seen over 10 or 11,000 deaths on TV and all these things. Yeah, our bodies don't always know what is reality and what's not. So part of, I think, the journey that we're on as a race is learning how to break that trauma-based mind control, learn how to come back into ourselves, to remember who we are, to allow our divinity to come out and you know, to live in a way of loving one another. And I think that's the beauty of life here is if we can embrace that, if we can even find joy in the smallest moments, that's how we get through
Mm.
and how we thrive. Yeah,
In your house, growing up as a child, you had other siblings. Were
yeah.
they also abused in the way that you were?
They were quite horrifically. My older brother, Rick, um, he and I moved in together in my end of my second year of uni. I moved in with him, and he was actually quite nice to me. We'd fought really badly as children because there's so much trauma in the house, and he used to bash me up as well. But then, I was 20, he was 22. We moved in together, and I went to uni one day, and I got called down to the office, and he'd been killed. So they hauled me off to the morgue to identify his body, and that just shattered me, and that was intentional. And then they hid the reasons for his death. The police destroyed all the records. I got a copy from the coroner, and it was a famous film producer in America who'd killed him. And there were never any charges laid. My younger brother has, because of the incest in the family, has a lot of birth defects, so they experimented on him relentlessly. And my mother got both my younger siblings into drugs when they were quite young, and as a way to make sure they were controlled and things like that. And I'm estranged from both of them at the moment. My younger brother has an AVO to stay away from me after assaulting me last year. So yeah, so we were all involved. My younger brother came to me at one stage. I was on a church camp in my 20s, and I'd started having the incest things come up, and I was sitting on the bus on my home just sobbing, and he came up and asked what was wrong. And I told him, and he burst into tears and then told me everything that he'd been through. And then 2 weeks later, he came to me and said, I lied and made it all up. And I know he hadn't, but he just, some things, some people can't deal with it. It's too hard, too painful. So it's not up to me to judge, but I've got to take my own path and my own journey and do what's right for me.
You do, and you have, and it's very admirable. Bless you for doing that. And it often is the case that one sibling can't handle or deal, and so they'll go against, like he's going against you. And
Yeah.
other people also, have a hard time understanding that these monstrous parents that raised you, when you break the will of a child on every imaginable and unimaginable level, that child often will still have desperate feelings for the parent, love, misunderstanding, a need to be seen, to be heard. And the fact that you wanted to see your mother before she died in hospital just a month ago, and you were prevented by your siblings, what was it in you that wanted to see her before she finally passed?
Well, if I can answer with my father as well, and it's totally correct. I always wanted my mother to love me, desperately, because what my mother would also do would she'd keep after my parents got divorced, she'd keep the other three kids close, and I would be totally shunned. And so I would come home from school, and they'd all be in her room laughing and playing. And the moment I walked in, out, out, out. So she tried to throw me out on the street. She told me she wanted me dead. But it was like, you know, I think a child's bond to its mother, you always want that love. And it took me quite a while, and it wasn't until probably about, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago that I let go of all of that and, realized I was never going to get it. And with the death, it's final now. But I think, I wanted to see, well, I felt psychically that I was meant to see my father on his deathbed. I hadn't seen him for 40 years. And I wanted a DNA test. But, my siblings turned up and, my brother assaulted me, and that was the end of that. So, um, my father it was like looking at a body where there was almost no soul and there was only like demonic entities looking out. That was the impression I got from him, and that's not a judgment thing. He's working through his life now, and it's going to be a lot of work. With my mum, I asked my guides what was going to happen to her, and they just, oh, don't worry about her. She'll have plenty of lives to come back and work through it all, which is hard work. But it was just, it's just that glimmer of hope to think that, and look, she moved out. I left Sydney and moved to the country, and she ended up following me here. And she started being nice to me, and I thought she was being nice, but it turned out it was all an act. And she started then undermining me, going behind my back, destroying my relationships, my friendships, and everything like that. And then, as I said, coming in, putting poisons in the food, with the help of my brother. Um, and so, I had to get to the point where I had to let all that go. My guides came to me around about that 4 to 5 years ago, and they said to me, enough is enough. We want you to change soul groups. And I said, well, can I have a think about it? Because I thought I didn't realize that could happen. And so I thought about it, and I came back to them a couple of days later and said, yeah, I think it's time. I'm ready for it. And so from that point on, it was like the energetic connection to these people who were my family started dissipating. Um, and so to the point where there isn't really any energetic connection anymore. And so I know when I die and go back into the soul space, they are not part of my soul group. So since then, I've been put with another soul group that is incredibly loving and protective. And that takes a while for that to sort of come into place. And so that started 3 to 4 years ago, and that's been amazing. And the other thing that happened to me probably about 10 years ago, which was quite profound and had a huge impact, was my guides came to me and said, I was just at the farm one day and they said, oh, your life contract's over. Do you want to stay around or do you want to go? And I was like, what do you mean? It's over. So they said, well, it's over. And I said, well, I'm not ready to go yet, because there are people I love and adore, that I wanted to be here for. And so I said, I want to stay around. And they said, well, okay. And then I started getting sick and I said, what's happening? And they said, well, I've got friends who are very good in the Akashic records, which I do as well. So I got them to do a reading. So I thought it would be more independent. And they said, well, if you're going to stay, you need to do a new life contract. Otherwise, you're just going to fade away. So I sat down and talked to friends who are psychics and went and did research and then sat down and did a new life contract. And I basically said, I want to experience the opposite of what I've had as a way to compare and contrast, because I thought that's a good way to learn in this life. And it was like hopping out of a river flowing in one direction and hopping into a river flowing in another direction. And so since that day, instead of attracting trauma, you know, things just naturally got easier and easier. So they were two things that were very profound. And as souls, we can do that. We can go to our guides and say, can we renegotiate a contract, or can I become aware of what I contracted to come here and learn? And so it's that as we increase the awareness, it's a way that we understand our path in this incarnation a lot easier. It makes it so much easier if you understand that maybe that you've come here to learn a hard lesson, and you go, oh, okay, well then I'm not a victim here. I've come to choose this lesson, so let's get on with choosing it rather than avoiding it. So there are a lot of ways of doing things like that. And then also moving soul groups. I mean, that's been profound to me. I'm still as I said, it's early days yet, but just the change in energy. Um, so when mum died, it was like a part of me wanted to see her and part of me didn't because I thought, well, what if I go and see her and she's nasty to me? Like when I saw my father, I mean, he was very happy to see me, but he was just really creepy. I didn't want him to touch me because I was so repulsed by what he did to me as a child. And he ended up dying a few days later. But with mum, it was, yeah, I didn't get to see her, and that's okay. And what's done is done. But it was quite an irony in a way that the two siblings that turned out both most like my parents ended up being the ones that sort of gave my parents a terrible send off. With my father, they had him quickly cremated. He wanted to be buried, and then um, I reckon threw his ashes in the bin. I've been told three stories that they've told other people what they did with them. And I thought, well, that's a bit karmic as to, my father, I suppose, bringing it on himself. But I'm glad that I wasn't part of that, if I can do that. Even to my parents' death, I still wanted to do the right thing. And in the years leading up to their death, my guides were instructing me, what to pray and to intercede to help them cross over. So, you know, I don't ever condone what my parents did. Part of what I've come here to learn is unconditional love. And so that's why, even in the midst of the most terrible evil, my guides would still get me to respond in compassion. As I said, I still stood up to my parents and I tried to have my father incarcerated repeatedly. But, I still have to, as a soul, learn how to love and to understand. Because I think when we go before our guides after this life, I wouldn't say it doesn't matter what we've gone through, but regardless of what we've gone through, they all still are there to help us to go in the right direction, if I can put it that way. It's not to say that, normally we've got to come back and learn our lessons in future lives. And, often men who rape, for example, will come back as a woman. And, so there's all that learning and things, but it's just because I read a lot of life after death things and I'm fascinated with, um, people who've died and come back and what they've experienced and so on. So that's sort of what informs me as well as my own death experiences.
Oh, excuse me. Yeah, it's a very interesting melee of ways to think there that you've just
Yeah,
shared, like karma, soul ties, soul contracts, soul groups. We all have our different inputs and different understandings.
totally. Yeah.
A bigger person than I in your ability to be unconditionally loving and compassionate. If I was to die in this moment, I would still find people in heaven or whatever realm and give them a good fucking slap and feel,
Yeah.
you know what I
Oh
mean?
yeah, don't say I don't feel like that.
Of
Yeah,
course, of course. But my point is that I honestly, truly know that a lot of the guides that mess people's lives up, are there to interfere, run interference, and cause great havoc. Also, lie to them, lead them astray, pretend to be loving. So, we come to understand that we are this soul. Having these experiences, and I think some of the old, like 1970s and 80s, the inversion of what spirituality truly is. It's like, oh, we've come to learn our lessons. Oh, Earth is a school. Oh, and I've got to the point now where I've worked all through all of those, and I'm like,
yeah,
so much of it is utter bollocks, and we speak as we've been taught, and we repeat as we have learned over and over and over again. You mentioned mesmerizing, Dr.
yeah,
Mesmer, who was
yeah,
one of the founders of hypnotherapy
yeah,
earlier, and how the word mesmerized comes from his name. Again, it's important for people to, I think, go back to teachings, trainings, understandings, and go for the founding root cause. Who was around that? Who created it? Or did they? Like it's like Tesla, a lot of his work. Well, Marconi tried to assert Tesla. I mean, there's lots of things where history is redacted, teachings are redacted. We've been programmed to be impressed by Princeton, Stanford, Yale, all of these institutions where that was a measurement to aspire to. And now we're like, again, bollocks.
yeah,
These days we're like, big deal. Big deal and big debt, and we've come to learn that the global leaders, the self-appointed, self-anointed, monstrous bloodline, satanic, incestual families that literally do run the planet on so many levels. And of course, guys, not every single person. You got to keep coming back to that because people go, "No, Danny Henderson said all the leaders on the planet." No, I didn't say that specifically.
Yeah,
But in this time of healing, one of the things I do, Doug, is I
yeah,
fully encourage human beings, humanity, to not kowtow and obey and be complicit to authority. Anybody in authority, ideally, number one, is in service to me and to you. They got a job.
exactly.
Right, exactly.
We pay for their wages. Totally, totally. And when I talk about learning and things, the reason I talk about that, and I hear what you're saying about a school, and I'm all for spiritual warfare. I'm not some, complacent person. And I get out there and fight. I march. I turn up on the headquarters of the Freemasons. I go to the police. So I'm actively there. I've just read the Police a Riot Act this weekend and said to them, you're not doing your job, you're gaslighting, so I'm all for that. But what I'm also for is saying, I've had a terrible past. There's no question there. But I'm responsible for how I respond to that past. And I can be a victim to my past, or I can say, what is going to best empower me to get through this? So I chose how I responded. Sometimes there may have been very, very limited ways that I could choose, and being brutalized and things like that. At times I was so far beyond my ability to um, choose because you're in the moment of the trauma. But now I can sit here and choose how I can respond to all of it. And the thing that I don't want to do is give my power away to anyone, to a government, to a body. I mean, I have huge issues with authority, as you can understand, with my background. And I would stand up to my parents and I would scream and then I would run. And my father actually said that he personally respected in the house was me because I was the only one who stood up to him. I mean, he tried to kill me every time I did, but not that his respect ever meant anything to me. But it's like, no, we fight. I'm going to fight. I'm going to fight to the last breath. It's like, um, people say, how could you go to the police over your mother? Well, she does the wrong thing. She did, she deserves to be in jail. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, look, it's okay that she can poison my food or she can do this or she can do that because she's my mother. No, she's got a sacred responsibility to have cared for me as a child, which she violated in every way she could. And they both thought it was funny. So I made my parents' life as a living hell as I could. So, but I'm still here saying I'm not going to be like them. I'm not going to turn out like them. I'm not going to become cynical about the world. I'm going to find joy and love. And I'd say that, my daughter, she had issues at school. I wasn't going to say much about my kids, but I said to her one day, if people treat you bad, go and find the people who treat you good. There's enough good people in this world that you don't need to put up with the bad ones. And she did. And it's like I look around, there's amazing people all around us, and I won't swear, but I get on Twitter. I've been banned off the internet. The government's come after me because I started blogging in 2006 and 7. I became the biggest blogger in Australia for a short period. I was fighting globalism, the climate fraud, climate cults, everything. They targeted me. They went after me. They tried to kill me. They hit me with a stun gun. I had a heart attack. I dropped dead. They had planes flying over. They monitored my phone. I'm an architect by profession. They went to the councils where I would submit my applications, where I was the person held up as to, for quality of work. I'd won awards. So they started calling up my clients saying, we will not approve anything that he lodges and so on and so on. So I have got a list like this. I have general managers who go to clients and I just fight them. At the moment, I've got death threats at the moment. Walking down the street, they're putting, targets on me. The other night went out for dinner with friends, and all of a sudden I've got this, LED laser on my chest as I'm walking down the street. Go to the police, they try and fob it off. I've been getting recordings of gunshots sent to me. I just keep going. I'm not stopping. I'm going to fight them. I'm going to expose them. So I'm totally with you on that.
Yeah,
Uh, uh,
bless your heart. It's amazing. I can never understand the banality, the retardation of these people that bully and maim and like, ooh, let me shoot a laser on you and scare the shit out of you. I mean, what? See, it's wordless to me. The
yeah,
stupidity of a person that does something like that. There is no words and no level of society that that person deserves to be in. At all, at all, at all. It's like your parents mocking and laughing with each other and
yeah,
creating connection with each other in that moment and attacking you, a vulnerable little boy. Let us
yeah.
go down a road of the cult scenarios and the ritual scenarios, if you don't mind. I've got my
Yep.
marketing team emailing and calling, and sorry if there's any noise there in the background.
Okay.
Um, can we share with the audience here what the ritual ceremonial stances were, what form they took, and what were the groups? Was it police, government, or share, please, whatever you're comfortable.
Well, I still have lots of gaps in that memories. So the stuff I do remember, well, as I said, my father and his best mate. And, as because you got to realize when you go through this stuff, they try to erase your memories. Okay. And, I used to be looking through my family to try and understand it because I love researching, but it wasn't until I researched my father's partner in crime and his family, then he was connected to the CIA in Sydney. That family then were CIA agents that were operating in Sydney. They were connected to corrupt politicians who were then connected to the mafia. So generally, like in America, Australia is similar. The intelligence agencies are demonic, if I can put it that way. Operation Paperclip, all those totally demonic. They need, the body men, to carry out their evil work. And I think my father was one of those. He killed quite a lot of people. And he was protected. The CIA opened up a bank in Sydney called the Nugan Hand Bank. They in the 1970s, and they funneled billions through it. And then the bank just closed and all the money disappeared and no one ever got really investigated. So there's all this stuff, and there's a lot of books on this that's been written. But so for me, with the cult stuff, it's, you know, I've got when my daughter was born, that's when all the flashbacks came where my hand was held on a knife while another little girl was murdered and sacrificed. And so I that was a really tough period because all of a sudden the dam had broken. But because I'm dissociative, I'm still working through. I haven't got all the memories, so that's my main, I suppose, cult memory as well as my brother. But me being buried in a box and things like that. So I'm progressively trying to work and recover them all, but I'm not trying to force it because that'll re-traumatize myself if I can put it that way. So I'm allowing my system to go at a pace that it can. I've started, getting the bloodlines. I mean, we've also got the Gordons in our family, and there's cult stuff there as well. So I'm starting to get all the connections to the people, the times, the places are all now lining up with memories, but I've still got a lot of memory work to do. My mother, has always been involved in witchcraft and done spells and things like that. And it's been interesting since she died, a lot of the barriers I had in my life have just dissolved. Um, but I don't have a huge, unlike Fiona Barnett or Kathy or Rachel, I still don't have a huge amount of the memories of the cults, but at the moment I'm working through all the memories from the MK Ultra.
Wow. You mentioned that since your mother has gone off the planet,
Yeah.
physically gone, so her soul has left the planet, the physical body disintegrates by fire or burial or whatever, but the soul energy leaves. And that often happens that a mother and a father when they're raising a child, their energy is intertwined with the child's energy. We grow
Yeah,
there, downloading their survival instincts, their being, their belief systems into our bodies. When they leave, they take their soul frequency with them. We are left here then having to re-identify who we are as a being without mum or dad. What
yeah,
happens also when you are an abused child in the way that you have been, let's just talk about your mum for the moment. There is
yeah,
something that some refer to as a guru cap, and it basically closes down your ability to perceive, to survive, to because the energy of the parent is so dominant, and in your case, so vile, so dark. So you are shut down. You're the guru cap. This happens to people who follow a leader, a guru, a shamanic,
yeah,
or including a dominant husband, a dominant wife. It's still the same. I own you, bitch. You're mine. Therefore, I will. And there's a part of us that doesn't realize that we are giving into this kind of guru cap, and that yours is completely gone. Like your whatever was holding you has completely gone. So you are untethered from that darkness that was with you from birth until literally a month ago, and
yeah.
it's amazing that you
Oh,
can.
it's wonderful. It's like with both my parents when they died, I didn't cry. It was like, oh, finally, not in a malicious way, but it's just like, because you're always in that freeze as a child and you take that into your adulthood, it's that clench. And so I have to shake a lot of things like that. So, yeah, so now I'm doing a lot of detoxing, releasing, with her funeral because, everyone was told the most appalling things about me. Um, and was invited, so I thought, right, I grabbed a friend. I said, let's go to New Zealand. We went to the most incredibly beautiful place in New Zealand and we went down to the water at a place called Milford Sound, and we did a healing, a Yoruba ceremony, which is from Nigeria, which is a healing ceremony with the water, where we let go of all of our anxiety in the past and receive blessing. And I thought, well, I'd rather just focus on the good things. But it's when your perpetrators die, particularly if they're your parents, you feel this level of safety. I go to my therapist and he goes, how are you today? I said, I'm really good. He goes, you've never said that before. Because it's just, I don't, because my mother moved 2 blocks away from me. So you got to realize it was like I would go in the street and, it was like, what am I going to have to deal with today? Whereas now I can just go, relax. The memories are coming back because it's like, you know, you don't fear the repercussions anymore. But I agree with you. It's a cap. I've never had gurus. I'm not a guru sort of person, but in terms of a mother and father, yeah, you know.
Mhm. And also for people, I don't want them to think, oh God, I have to wait until my abusers die. No,
No, no, not at all.
exactly. Now it's like even just a very quick tool, imagining the person down the street away from you, but you imagine a golden heartstring from your heart into their heart, and you imagine a big pair of scissors and you cut, 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 you cut it. It's always possible to cut and remove because when we put our attention on stuck energy in the body and we change the frequency and we take control of that, there is a massive release that can happen and does happen to people. No matter how many times you cut, you are creating a change in the energy frequency when somebody has owned you. Tell us a little bit about some of the healing groups and the healing modalities that you have been using for yourself over these years.
Well, they range from a whole pile of things. Anything from like yoga, I find really good. I don't do the chanting, but just the body work. I think when you've been through trauma, body work is so important. So one of the things I've struggled most with in life is being in my body, is feeling my body. I have problems feeling pleasure and I have problems feeling pain because they were things that weren't safe. I can cut myself and I won't realize it, and then there'll be blood everywhere, and I go, oh you know. So for people who've been through particularly physical trauma and sexual trauma, our bodies aren't safe. So earlier on, I learned to, get a good idea of my headspace and how to work with that. And I started reading psychology, when I started studying architecture. And so very quickly I learned to understand what was going in my headspace. But they say the body keeps a score. It's getting that trauma out of the body, but the body is also incredible for accessing the memory. So at the moment I'm doing EMDR, which is brilliant because, we're going into the body, particularly when you've been through electrocution to try and erase or confuse your memories. The body remembers. And so we'll go into a body sensation, and that gives me a pathway into a memory, which then we can go in and then start reprocessing and things like that. I have done psychedelics therapeutically, which has been profound. And they have brought up, they've bypassed my ego states and things like that, which have been really good. The things the psychedelics taught me was I have so many control mechanisms and I need to be letting them go. A lot of people go and do psychedelics and they go, be responsible, stop taking drugs. I go and do psychedelics and they're like, stop being so controlling, go out and have fun with life, enjoy yourself. And when I did ayahuasca, for example, it brought all my trauma up and I got PTSD from the first time I did it because I did a heavy dose and it blew all my doors off. But all of a sudden, the pure version of me is standing in front of me without trauma. This is on the journey. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I always wanted to know who I was before the trauma because my trauma had been, I didn't want it to be my identity. Um, but then the pure version of me without the trauma got bigger. And so the current controlling version of me goes, oh, this feels a little bit uncomfortable. But the pure version of me kept on getting bigger and bigger. And the controlling version of me kept on freaking out because all of a sudden, all my control mechanisms were being exposed. And then the pure version of me got so big it turned into a tidal wave and drowned the controlling version of me. And at that stage, you're puking and peeing your pants, because you're letting go. But, I had experiences like that. I did the peyote, which is a cactus, and it came to me because I've had really significant chronic fatigue from the trauma. And it came to me and said, you turned your life force down to 1 out of 10 because you didn't want to feel the pain. It said, right, we're going to fix it. And it went whoop, and turned my life force up to 5 out of 10. And I almost jumped out of my body. I was on this cactus walk with about 10 other guys through a national park. And I just couldn't stop running. I was doing laps and laps and laps, and so that was a very powerful journey. When I did the iboga, which is a bark of an African tree, and I did a flood dose, and it's the strongest psychedelic in the world, and they use it for people who have addiction issues very successfully. But it was profound. For 8 hours, I just sat there, and a screen appeared in front of me. We went through every thought in my head over 8 hours, and after 8 hours, there were no thoughts in my head. Now, before that time, I could never meditate. I could never silence my mind. Since then, I can meditate anytime, any place, and I can just drop into my breathing and think nothing. If my head gets too cluttered, I just tilt my head and empty the thoughts out. So, there have been some profound things like that. So I've tried to push the boundaries. As I said, I went to a sexological body worker, which was really confronting because for me, I have a lot of issues around touch and around sexuality and sex. And what I learned from that was how unsafe I feel in my body to feel pleasure. Anytime I would feel pleasure, I'd totally disassociate. And so we trace that back to, some of the things my father did to me as a little boy. So I like trying different modalities. I don't stick with one. I don't say to people, you've got to do this or that, but I say to people, find out what works for you. Find out, you know, um, what's good. At the moment, I'm in an online group, where we're working through Tantra because again, it's learning how to create safe places and things like that. So I enjoy learning. Really enjoy healing. I enjoy feeling more. It's like, I've always had really problems with skin and lupus and that. And, my arms, I've had really, really, really bad rashes the doctors could never heal. My mother died and they're all healing now.
Mhm. It's just incredible. I want to share something on the spiritual
Yeah.
side. that you triggered, which is a lovely thing to share. And again, it's a story of survival. So I was hiking in the mountains in San Diego where I used to live years ago. And the girl I was with, a friend I was with, said, "Let's go up this mound up here." It was a sacred mound. And we started going up, and I was like, "Oh, this is so beautiful." And then there was a rock in the middle, and I felt compelled to do a water blessing. I didn't even know that was a thing. You know how things
Yep,
come to you when you're going through these
yep.
sacred places. And then I started walking higher up and along this path, and my friend started screaming, "Danny, stop, stop, stop. There's a cliff." I said, "There's no cliff." She went, "Danny, Danny," like screaming, running up to me. And I knew I just kept going. And then she ran through what she thought was, going to be the end of a cliff. And she said, "I don't understand." And she was really shaking. And I said, "What we just did, we just walked through a thought wall. The people that preserve
Wow.
this sacred mound, they would create
Yep,
imagery, a lot of false thinking, and project their thoughts. And it can do this for good or for bad. And so
yep,
people would think, I can't go any further because there's a cliff there. For whatever
yeah.
reason, maybe because I did the water blessing and I was asking for permission and I was able to go through that thought wall. But it's incredible what we do on either side of the whole of this earth. These earth experiences are things that we're able to do. I want to go back down to EMDR that you are
Yes,
doing.
yeah,
Can you give
yeah,
us, yeah, give us your understanding of what EMDR is, because I know this particular therapy is extremely helpful to many people who've suffered physical trauma.
Basically, what you're doing with EMDR is reprogramming the memory. So instead of the memory being attached to the trauma response, so when you go through, like when I've gone through the horrific things like most of us, we go into the clench, into the freeze, like that, and we hold the trauma into our bodies. Animals, I think Peter Levine talks about this. When they go through that, they go and shake it off. We as humans don't. We collect freezes and traumas and they build up in our body and cause illness and sickness. So with the EMDR, we're going back to the memory, we're recognizing that it's in the past, and then we're reprogramming the mind so that you can remember the memory without reliving the trauma. So when you're doing this, well, when the therapist is doing this, basically you're focusing on the therapist to distract your mind so that you can go back in. And it's similar like the other therapies that you can do, which is along with this, the psychedelic, is part of what happens with trauma is we have like a trauma block, my mind's got a little bit blank, but we try to go into our trauma and we freeze. So you can do ketamine or MDMA or psilocybin, where it relaxes. I don't know why I've forgotten what the name of it is, but it relaxes that part of your consciousness so you can then go and access your memories without being re-traumatized. So EMDR is doing it in a different way like that. And so what the therapist does is, I had a really bad, like most survivors of ritual abuse, our birthdays and Christmas are normally the worst days. And even when we're outside of our families energetically, until we deal with the past, it still happens. I had really, really bad Christmas last Christmas, and it triggered a suicidal episode in me, which a really serious one, which I hadn't had for quite a while. But it was all the abandonment issues and things like that. So with the therapist, and I didn't self-harm. And if I got to the point where I would do something like that, then I would go up to the hospital or whatever. But so we went back into that feeling of total abandonment that I, ended up spending Christmas on my own, total abandonment, and what was under that and what triggered that. And as we went into that, that took me straight back to that memory with the MK Ultra, where they'd suffocate me to death and then resuscitate me. And the feeling I felt during that period was total abandonment. And so going back to that, now I can remember that memory. I no longer feel the abandonment. And then also that trigger to be suicidal has gone. So that's how it plays out. The other thing, you might laugh about this, is when my mother died, I thought, "Oh, I'm never going to commit suicide again. I never want to go near that." You know, that woman in the afterlife. I'm staying here as long as I can.
There's a preventative for you.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I thought, oh, finally, my one of my perpetrators is gone. I said to my guys, I laughed with them. I said, let me stay around for a while. I need a breather.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. That's so
I
funny.
don't know if that. I mean, you might better explain it better than I do, but that's how I understand EMDR.
Mhm. Yeah, no, no, very good, very, very good. And there's something called timeline therapy and also NLP programming, and I have
Yeah,
trained in both. And then they've tried to bastardize NLP, but I think that again with anything, you can use it for good, you can use it for negative.
totally. Yeah,
And the EMDR is a bit similar to timeline therapy. So what you do is you get the person to remember about 1 minute maybe before the event occurred to them. Then you have
yeah,
them imagine themselves floating up and over the event. So you're getting them to disassociate from the trauma in the body. And you have them
yeah,
float over the event, looking down on it, then landing after it happened. And what that does,
yeah,
it helps you take the negative charge connected to the trauma, which is physical and emotional, and many other layers too. And it starts to help neutralize and kind of remove the emotional electrical charge, the trigger point that we have. One of the greatest tools, and probably the only reason why I studied neurolinguistic programming, was to
yeah,
learn this one technique that I'll share here. You go again in the thought that perhaps it might help people out there who are,
yeah.
recovering, especially for this broadcast, the men that we're
Yeah.
directed.
Well, they're all tools. Yeah,
Exactly. So with
yeah,
NLP, we ask people, okay, so you're going to think of something that happened to you, and you're just going to bring all of the feelings into the body for a few seconds. I don't believe in sitting in that shit for an hour. That's just re-triggering everything. So you say for a few seconds, and then they allow themselves to feel it, and you say on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you? They're going to be 8, 9, 10. It's rarely
yeah,
ever 5. It's normally higher, 7, 8, 9,
yeah,
10. And then you say, right, okay. And then you say, now, where in the body is the energy? And often it's in their chest. And you say,
yeah,
is it big? Is it small? And is it moving? If it's big, you make it small. If it's moving, you imagine it's still. And you also say, what color is it? And that there is such a different thought on anything. So when you bring in a different level of thinking, so they go, well, it's dark, it's normally dark. You say, right, you're going to make it your favorite color. So what you're doing is you are 100% reversing what that is, what this is, this trauma stuck in the body. You reverse it. The neural pathway that is attached to that physical emotional experience and memory is completely scrambled. It's reversed. And so
yeah,
the body then cannot find that filing cabinet, that memory, that picture because you've reversed it. You've taken out the emotional charge. You've taken out the trauma that the cellular memory holds onto that creates memory in our filing systems. And it's absolutely outstanding. Then you say to the person, when you've gone through the steps of, is it big? Is it small? Is it moving? And then they get them to reverse it to the opposite of what it presented itself as. And then you say to them, now, on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you? And
yeah,
99.99999, that's come down. And often
yeah,
we'll bring it down to zero. And you're showing the person that's been holding on to the horror of whatever that horror is, how much power and control they literally have. They literally own on their own body in energy, frequency, signature, responses, memories, happenings. I mean, everything. Look at me hugging myself. It's
yeah.
I'm a great
But, you-
self-soother.
as you say, it's reclaiming your power. It's saying, well, hang on a moment, I can change this. I can, through visualization, through all these different techniques, I can take my body back and I can say, my body is sacred, and I can have boundaries. I can have this. Yeah, the guy I see is a psychodynamic therapist, I think he called, but he does the 1 to 10 as well. So we work through that until we get the charge out of the body. So, but I like that I can remember the memory because I like to better place things and go, okay, now I understand why I felt this or why I felt that or different things like that. So it's and the other thing which is probably I find important as well. I don't know whether you've done past life therapy or
Yeah,
anything like
past
that.
life regression. I'm a past life regression therapist too. It's all part of it. The great
It
healing.
is, but it's also remembering, because some things I had that were traumatic, like I had a fear of being eaten by a wild animal, and I couldn't trace that to anything. But in my last life, that's what happened. So sometimes it's good to look at our last lives as well if we're trying to map out our own psychology and understand where things come from. And I say to people too, I've been a woman in other lives, I've been a man. I think my dominant soul is male, but does it really matter? We're all just you know,
Yeah.
trying to do the best we can.
Yeah, on past life regression, for me, I would never regress someone over the internet. I think it's really irresponsible and dangerous. I can read someone's past lives if they're open to showing me. They don't even realize how powerful they are. You can show a person
Yeah,
anything, but you got to be so careful. The first time I ever did past life regression, I had no clue what the sailors did with cabin boys. I had no connection, even a thought, until I saw myself as a cabin boy and what happened to me.
wow.
And it was a
Yeah,
shock. And then it's another
yeah,
marker of my God, that's true. These poor little boys were used in worse
yeah,
ways. And unfortunately, the therapist, he kissed me, tried to kiss me during
yeah,
this session, which
yeah.
totally traumatized me. Totally
Of course.
traumatized.
Yeah,
It's such an invasion. And also, I would say to men and women, but especially men, do not touch a woman's tummy. Do not. You got to ask permission. Do not touch a pregnant woman's belly without asking her. Do not touch a teenage girl who might be carrying some weight. There are things that we have to go back to basic respect of male and female bodies. But as I'm sharing this trauma event that I had doing past life regression, because the man touched my tummy when I wasn't completely out of the trance, the
yeah,
hypnotherapy that he'd used. And I remember being so angry and making a note in my mind, I'm going to tell people, remind people, don't touch a woman's tummy. It's so invasive,
yeah,
and it triggers a lot. And it also shuts, I'll speak for women because I'm a woman,
yeah.
women down, but I'm sure, men and boys too, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, children are sacred. We're there, we have a sacred responsibility as adults to protect children. I mean, with, my kids, I work from home since they were born because because of what I've been through, I was so overprotective. And my son said to me one day, Dad, you love too much, you know, because and I had to learn to let go and things like that. But I didn't want my kids babysat, anything because I felt it was my responsibility to protect them. And, over a 20-year period, well, I set aside 20 years and ended up being more like 30 of, just being there for them and looking after them. And I absolutely love that. And there were a lot of sacrifices. I didn't want to do corporate and go off and buy them every present. I wanted to give them my time. And, that was so important. But I think when we treat each other with love and respect and boundaries, you can tell when someone wants you to be in their space or not. And it's important to respect that and to engage with that and learn how to interact with people. Like you say, I think we're a lot more gifted and talented than we let ourselves know. We're being numbed down by the machine. I keep disconnecting more and more. I love being in nature. I live in the country. I grow my own food. They're the joys. I talk to my plants and things. And, when you look at the intricacies of life. There is so much to enjoy, and with other people, it's like, learning to respect other people. I'd have people who'd come up to me and go, I feel totally safe with you.
Mm.
And I think, that's such a wonderful thing. I don't have any intention to be honest or to be safe or do any of those things, but I just have an intention to be authentic, and that authenticity to be someone that is not only good for myself, but good for other people. And I think when we're like that, rather than, you know, you know, invading people's boundaries or space, it's better to understand who someone is, um, and respect that, and you end up with a much better level of engagement anyway.
Yeah, yeah, that's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. I am so grateful to you, like for giving me and giving this beautiful audience that will see this broadcast your time, your testimony, your experiences. They are truly harrowing on so many levels. And yet you are again testament to the beauty and the brilliance of the human soul and the human spirit and the
Yeah,
heart, what we can come through. And I'm often referring to Kathy O'Brien and Rachel Vaughan and Max Lowen and Gloria Masters
yeah.
in particular.
Max is amazing. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. And they have been through the darkest of the dark. Yet right now in the world, what are they doing? Apart from sharing their testimony, they're healing. They're healing
yeah,
others. They've come so far in their healing, they are safe to bring healing modalities and therapies and holding space for others. It's just incredible. And so I just thank you so much for, again, giving me your time, sharing yourself. I look forward to this going out and, knowing that it's going to help so many other men in particular, which was the intention, as well as meeting you and bringing you to the audience today.
yeah. Well, it'd be great. Well, thank you for giving me a voice and a platform. And yeah, for men, just, you know, find who they are. That journey is wonderful, to go out and to learn how to love and respect and adore yourself and help yourself and build yourself up. And it doesn't matter what we've been through, we're stronger. Evil by its very nature is destructive, so it destroys itself. Whereas I think when we love and when we, help each other, that's powerful. That's a building force that constantly expands. So I think, we will always win doing the right thing. Not that it's a game, but you know what I mean. We'll always, it's the nature of the universe to succeed.
Absolutely. Now, as we have highlighted on so many levels, programming, I'm going to say something now that will trigger some people, but that's a good thing because people have got to start recognizing when they have been used and MK ultra'd and it basically impressed or manipulated by outside sources. So this broadcast in particular, in this moment of signing off, is just for the men. And I will say that. Now, I guarantee you, a ton of people will get triggered instantly into thinking, that's not inclusive. What about me? I'm not a man or a woman. I'm a furry, and this is where
Yeah.
we gotta go. We gotta go there. And like I said, I've named the women. I love everybody, but right now I'm honoring you as a man, Doug McIntyre. I'm honoring
Yeah.
the client that died from a broken heart from being abused by the school teacher from 8 years old. I am loving on every single man, male, who sees this and is on a healing journey. And I want them to know that they are loved, that they are seen, and that you have given so much in terms of saying, respect yourself, love yourself, men. And we don't overlook you, even though you feel overlooked. I love you, men. I bloody love you.
And there are a lot of amazing men out there doing amazing work and who are really stepping up to the plate and, healing and becoming so strong. And it's amazing to see. Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. If people did want to connect with you, Doug, is there a way they can do that? Are you open?
Um, at the moment, I'm just on X. So allegedly D Live is on there. My website's down at the moment. So I keep getting issues with websites. I've been deplatformed a number of times, but it is going to go up, hopefully in a not too distant future.
Okay, good. All right. So brilliant. Well, thank you again, Dis. Really grateful
Thanks,
for that.
Danny. Lovely to share this space with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And to you guys out there, wow, I know you're going to be very grateful to Doug McIntyre for coming on and sharing harrowing details of his childhood to the present time. But I do hope this gives you courage, it gives you strength, and it reminds you men again to look inside here and love on that little boy that lives inside of you. My name is Danny Henderson. I send you love from my heart to yours, and I'll see you soon. Thank you, Doug.
Thanks, Danny.